Good morning, or depending on when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name is Ross, and as always told, out of Voice Radio. So today, we're going to be looking at Spell Tag, a rather interesting Pokemon tool, which is going to be coming out in Fairy Rise. Of course, Fairy Rise is purely for Fairy, Psychic, and Grass-type Pokemon. Although we do have Kecleon, but then again, Kecleon works with the unit energy, which is Fairy type, so I think we can forgive that little indiscretion. Otherwise, it's purely Grass, Fairy, and Psychic Pokemon, so we would expect some little tricks for those Pokemon, and we do, ladies and gentlemen. We have Spell Tag. What does it do? Well, the translation here comes from the lovely David Hochmann over at RappelmannTCG. Not to be honest that should surprise you at this point. And it says, if the Psychic Pokemon to which this card is attached gets knocked out by damage from your opponent's Pokemon's attacks, put 4 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you like. Of course, there are many ways around this. There are several things that your opponent can do to make sure they don't take this damage. I get that. But honestly, ladies and gentlemen, it's so good that it's got to be worth a look. Now, the ruling queries, just to get them out the way at the beginning. Yes, it can only be attached to a Psychic Pokemon. That means that something like the Kecleon with the right unit energy would count and could totally use this. But then if the unit energy got removed with, say, an Enhanced Hammer, then it would no longer be a Psychic type. So even though you could attach it, it wouldn't do anything. And that's the other thing that's important to note here. This can be attached to any Pokemon you like. It's not like Strong Energy, which can only be attached to a fighting Pokemon. It can be attached to whatever you like, but it can only actually have an effect when attached to a Psychic Pokemon. It is knocked out by damage, so if you're knocked out by placing damage counters, the new Chandelure, for instance, places 4 damage counters with its first attack. That would not activate Spell Tag. Similarly, if you were KO'd by poison, that would not work here because you're KO'd by poison, not by damage. And if something like a Decidueye or a Greninja GX would come along and KO you using the ability, that would not count either. It's got to be damage, it's got to be from an attack, and this has got to be attached to a Psychic Pokemon to do anything, though you can attach it to whatever you like. And that is of course relevant for stuff like the Tool Drop Trubbish, which obviously is only in Expanded, but that does more damage based on all the tools on the field, so you might want to attach this even though you're not actually getting any benefit from it. But once this gets rolling, this is looking pretty good. And one of my favourite uses for this is the new Chandelure. Now, the new Chandelure, the best attack here for 2 Psychic Energy, does 20 damage to the active for each damage counter on all of your opponent's Pokemon. So you add up all the damage on all of your opponent's Pokemon, double it, and that's how much damage you do to the active. And because you're doing so much damage here, as long as you can, get the odd Tapu Koko flying flip rolling, you don't actually mind here not playing Choice Band. Because you're doing so much damage, or at least you should be if the deck is working correctly, Choice Band becomes a luxury rather than a necessity, whereas if you look at something like a Lapras deck, you need the Choice Band to hit 190 and get a KO on a Buzzwole. That means that you can afford to play other tools. And then of course Spell Tag, when your Chandelure gets knocked out, you get to put 4 damage counters on your opponent's side of the field, and you put them anywhere, at which point the next Chandelure's doing 80 extra damage. That, ladies and gentlemen, is pretty gosh darn sweet. Now, you don't have to stash the damage on there, of course. You could just knock something out. Want another use for it? How about Pumpkaboo? Now, obviously, we're purely in Expanded here, but Pumpkaboo's a Psychic Pokemon, and the great thing about Pumpkaboo is it's got such a low HP that your opponent is going to have a hard time doing damage and then letting poison KO you because you've got so little HP. So you're probably going to get KO'd by damage, and especially if you're in, say, a mirror match here, 4 damage counters is enough to KO a Joltik, so that could be a really fun tech in the Night March mirror match, whereby your opponent KOs Pumpkaboo, and then Spell Tag goes and KOs a Joltik. I feel fairly confident that if you go back a couple of years when Night March was everywhere, if Spell Tag was in that format, it would have been a really spicy tech, a quite popularly played tech for Night March mirror matches. Of course, it's a moot point because we'll never know, and although Night March is legal and expanded and will remain legal and expanded next year, it's not as good as it once was. As a deck, it just doesn't have the same clout as it used to. Okay, so that's a couple uses for it. But the thing is, everybody's playing Tapu Lele. So what you could do here is just pop it on a Tapu Lele. Let's say it's your only 2 prize Pokemon on the field. And essentially, it means if your opponent KOs it, they take 4 damage counters. Now, as we're going to see in a moment, there's things your opponent can do to get round it. So your opponent might think, well, I'm not going to Guzma it this turn because I'm going to have to take 4 damage counters. I'll wait a couple of turns. That's still a benefit to you. Even if attaching this to a Tapu Lele makes your opponent wait a couple of turns to go after that Tapu Lele, that still works absolutely fine by me here. Now, speaking of getting rid of it, obviously Field Blower's the elephant in the room here. Now, to be clear, we expect Field Blower to rotate out next September 2019. So if we don't have any other tool removal released, we could potentially end up in a format where we don't have good tool removal, like we didn't before Field Blower came out. I mean, people were legit using Beedrill EX to remove tools. We were in such a dire position for removing them. If we end up in a format like that, Spell Tag becomes so much better. As it is at the moment, your opponent can play a Field Blower to get rid of it. Or they can KO you using an ability. Or by dropping damage counters. Or by using poison, or by using burn, or if you KO yourself by confusion. There's many different ways to get around this. But the point is, your opponent has to get around it. Let's take something like the promo Mewtwo from Shining Legends. Well, it wasn't really from Shining Legends, but it was a promo in a Shining Legends pack, so I'm totally counting it. Let's say you put a Spell Tag on this against a Zoroark deck. What Zoroark can essentially do here is get a one-hit KO, and then you get to put 4 damage counters, which could be the difference between KOing a Zoroark and not KOing a Zoroark. Or they could try and limit their bench so they hit you for 100, and then maybe they can bring out some poison or something like that in the future, but that's going to be kind of awkward. Or maybe they wait a turn so they can draw into a Field Blower, but then again, waiting a turn's not particularly clever, because waiting a turn means you give your opponent an extra turn of attacking. This is a kind of stuff that Spell Tag does. If your opponent has a Field Blower in hand, yeah, it's going to be pointless. And yes, you have to play this over Choice Band. You can only attach 1 tool to most Pokemon. Genesect annoyingly can take 2 tools but isn't a psychic type. Otherwise, this would be so much fun with Genesect. So you know what? A lot of the time, you're not going to use it. And when you do use it, your opponent's going to get rid of it. But when it works, you're doing 4 extra damage counters. Everybody plays Choice Band to do 3 extra damage counters, only to an active EX or GX, and this is 4 anywhere around the field for an item card. If there was an item card that just said, put 4 damage counters on your opponent's side of the field, it would be an instant 4 of broken card in every single deck. This obviously has some downsides. But it's so good and gives you such an advantage when it works, it's got to be worth considering. And certainly in a deck like Chandelure, which you'll know I'm going to be testing, it takes on an extra level of awesomeness. For the moment, I'm going to be giving this between 3 and 4 Wassies. We don't give half Wassies, that would be barbaric. And I seem to be giving that to like every card lately. But honestly, this is a bit better than put a couple copies in your binder, you might want to use it one day. But it's not as good as it is definitely going to see play in a whole bunch of decks. Ergo, between 3 and 4 Wassies. But if we get to next September and Field Blower rotates and we haven't had an adequate replacement released, which is absolutely possible, Oh my goodness, ladies and gentlemen, things could get very, very interesting very, very quickly. This card would become so much better. But for now, I want to know what you think about this. Do you think it's going to see play? Do you think it's going to work? Let me know in the comment section. Go nuts, but remember the rule. Be nice. Make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at the Wassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all of that, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. But by far the most important thing, as always, is to look after yourselves until next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.